You're listening to the For I Will Be With You podcast. For I Will Be With You. Daily reflections on recovery from the Bible.
Welcome back to For I Will Be With You, the podcast for the fifth week of the year, January 29th to February 4th. We're going to be covering from Genesis 23:4 to Genesis 25:8. So, since last time we were here, Isaac has grown up and his mother Sarah has died. So now Abraham takes Sarah to bury her back in the land of Israel in a place called Hebron, or Hebron, as it's called, which is in modern-day Israel. And he arranges to purchase a cave called the Cave of Machpelah, which is still in Hebron. If you want to go visit it, it's there. And it's where, according to tradition, Abraham, Sarah, and some of the other patriarchs and matriarchs are buried. It's a very holy site. So in Genesis 23:4, Abraham approaches a person named Ephron, who is a Hittite. The Hittites were people that lived in that part of the world at that time. He wants to purchase this cave as a burial spot for his wife. And he is talking to their leader, Ephron, and a group of Hittites, and he says to them in Genesis 23:4, he says, "I am an alien and a resident among you." This is how Abraham begins the eulogy for his wife. It's an unusual statement because Abraham was a very well-known person and an extremely wealthy person. He was very famous. He was a significant somebody in this part of the world. Yet he has a lot of humility. He was looked at as royalty, really. He's viewed like a prince. Yet he refers to himself as an alien. This is a kind of a classic identity dilemma that Jewish people have faced throughout history, feeling, welcome and part of different societies, but also separate. And this is a sort of an outsider feeling that I think a lot of us alcoholics can probably relate to as well. I know a lot of people in the rooms who say they feel separate from other people, even when they're with people who know them well. And what's driving it, can be a lot of things, but secrets, shame, things like that keep us distant from other people. But like Abraham, we're also residents. We're apart from or a part of society and family. So the challenge we face in recovery is to bring ourselves closer to others and be more like residents and less like aliens as we make our way in the world as sober people. So in the next section, Ephron replies to Abraham. Ephron is the leader of this group in this area. He's the owner of the cave, that's for sure. He says in Genesis 23:14, he says, "And Ephron replied to Abraham, saying to him, 'My lord, heed me, land worth 400 silver shekels. Between me and you, what is it? Bury your dead.'" So this is a kind of a confusing little moment because Ephron appears to be saying, go ahead and take this land for free. Go ahead and bury your dead, even though it's worth 400 shekels, which is a unit of money. So what Ephron is doing is he's saying, "Oh, go ahead, take it. Why? Oh, I wouldn't dream of selling you land. That's so gauche, but it's worth 400 shekels, by the way, wink, wink." And, of course, as the commentators note, Ephron had absolutely no intention of giving away a piece of land, but he wanted everyone to think he was being generous. And what the commentators also say, based on a sort of detailed textual interpretation, is that Ephron is actually talking about a different currency unit than the regular shekel. There were two kinds of shekels. There was the regular shekel, which was like a coin, and then there was basically like the big shekel, which was like basically like a silver ingot, which had the value of 2,500 regular shekel coins. So what Ephron is saying is that he really wants to charge Abraham 1,000,000 silver shekels for this field and this cave. So it's really a vast fortune. So not only is he being a liar by saying, showboating around in public, saying, "Well, of course I will give you this field to bury your dead." He's also lying about the price he wants. He's a hypocrite, and he's a greedy hypocrite, and he's willing to exploit Abraham's intent to bury his wife. And I think that we may recognize this kind of behavior, even if we aren't quite this ridiculous. But this is a very much addict behavior. He wants to show off, but he's a liar. I think we've all been in that place at some point in our alcoholism and addiction. If we're honest with ourselves, we might recognize a little bit of Ephron in us. Like, if you make a big show of picking up the check so everyone will think you're rich and a good guy, even though you can't afford it, but then you pay for it later, or you make other people pay for it later, right? That's real. Many of us have been through that kind of thing. So this story, this moment, can teach us something about humility in the negative. We can take Ephron as a negative example of how to behave. And it brings to mind a wonderful comment that I learned from a rabbi that I know. When I shared with him that I was very frustrated with an individual who, in my opinion, was behaving very badly. And he said, "Look, some people are here to show us how to behave in life, and other people are here to show us how not to behave." It's a very simple point, but I think true. If you see somebody doing something that you don't approve of, there's always an opportunity to learn about yourself. So maybe it's a negative example. So when you see Ephron the Hittite being greedy and dishonest, we can take it as a cue that we should work on our own instincts to be greedy and dishonest and work on being the opposite. Genesis 23:19 says, following right along, says, "And afterwards Abraham buried Sarah his wife in the cave of the field of Machpelah facing Mamre, which is Hebron in the land of Canaan." Abraham's commitment to Sarah, which we see here, through his commitment to burying her in a holy place, shows his great respect for his wife and family in general. The Torah goes into detail in this burial because God wants us to understand the importance of family in our spiritual lives. That's one interpretation of this verse. So many of the Bible's commandments revolve around family. We are commanded to honor spouses and parents. We are commanded to educate our children and show them by example how to have fear of God and love for God. In recovery, we also must place family in a central position. To enjoy good recovery, we must dedicate ourselves to being part of our families, being better spouses, parents, children. Now, of course, this is sometimes easier said than done, because if we've been acting out in addiction, we may have harmed our families or distanced ourselves from them. I certainly know people in the rooms who haven't spoken to their families in years, and maybe with good reason. It's very sad, but this is what happens. And I think many of us have had experienced some degree of this. I know people who have been thrown out of their houses and told never to come back because they were stealing from their families or acting violently or being mean and insensitive, whatever. It's sad, but the directive is very clear. We should work on making family part of our recovery. Now, this may mean making amends or making living amends, where we can try hard to be good for people who are closest to us. And I'll give you an example of living amends, because with family, it's difficult to make amends sometimes. For example, I know a man who was a chronic pot smoker, and pot smoking can be very damaging to families because it makes, in this case, made this individual very tuned out. He was present. I mean, it was one of these weird situations. He was present in the home. He made a living. Everybody was doing okay, but he wasn't there. He was stoned for years, and his children, who are now grown up, experienced a lot of neglect and emotional neglect as a result of this. So he has made a decision in sobriety to be present for his adult daughters. And this takes the form of, for example, this sounds trivial, but he will always drive them to the airport when they need to go to the airport. So it's a gesture. It's a way to say, I want to be here for you now. So he does little things like that as living amends. Because he can't go back and, re-attend the, 10th birthday party that he wasn't there because he was stoned. He can't go back there, but he can go forward. Genesis 24:2 takes us up to a point where now Sarah has died, and Isaac, who is Abraham's son, is about 40 years old. And Abraham says to his servant Eliezer, Abraham has a servant, but he's more than just a servant. He's like his right-hand guy who is involved in running this whole enterprise that Abraham has created, which is helping to preach monotheism and bringing people into contact with God. It's like Abraham is running like a whole organization, and Eliezer, who's his servant, is the guy who's really running things. So Genesis 24:2 is a conversation between Abraham and Eliezer. He says, quote, "And Abraham said to his servant, Swear by God, God of heaven and God of earth, that you not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites, among whom I dwell. Rather, to my land and to my kindred shall you go and take a wife for my son Isaac. The servant said to him, Perhaps the woman shall not wish to follow me to this land." So Abraham is extremely old at this point, but also he's delegating this task of finding a wife for his son Isaac from his family. They live in Canaan at this point, and Abraham does not want Isaac to marry a Canaanite, even though Eliezer is a Canaanite. So it's sort of Eliezer is, he should theoretically be insulted, but he understands that Abraham wants a specific, a woman from a specific family, his family, back in a different part of the world, to marry Isaac, that only a person from that family will be suitable. And where Abraham is coming from, you have to understand what's going on here. This is more than just Isaac needs to get married. And let's just put aside for a second the slightly odd, or at least from our perspective, idea that a 40-year-old man needs his father's servant to find a wife for him, but things were done differently in those days. But Isaac isn't just any old guy. Isaac is Abraham's son, and Isaac is the link between Abraham and the future of the Israelite people, and really the future of monotheism from the Judeo-Christian perspective. So this is not any old person, and it's not any old marriage. The woman who is selected to marry him will be the mother of the Israelite people and the Judeo-Christian tradition. So this is a very serious engagement. And Eliezer was, of course, aware of this. You have to realize Eliezer was, according to the commentary, a man of tremendous spiritual gifts and depth himself. It wasn't just any old person who happened to be helping Abraham schlep things around. So Abraham has sent Eliezer on a mission that puts him in a predicament. And this is the predicament according to the commentary. Eliezer himself had a daughter, and he very much wished for this daughter to marry Isaac. This was his dream, really. Eliezer's dream was to have his daughter marry Isaac and have his daughter become the mother of the Israelite people and the mother of the Judeo-Christian tradition. Eliezer and Abraham, they had prophetic powers. They knew what was coming. It wasn't just like, oh, yeah, they should get married. This was a significant opportunity for Eliezer. So when Eliezer says, perhaps the woman, meaning the woman who he's being sent to find, will not wish to follow me to this land, he's sort of opening up a loophole. He's saying, well, what if she doesn't want to come? Then, ... my daughter can marry Isaac, and me, Eliezer, I can secure my place as the grandfather, as the other grandfather of Israelite people. So, of course, it's true the woman may not want to come with him. If he can't find the right wife for Isaac, then his daughter can marry Isaac. So he has an enormous conflict of interest. Yet, despite this urge to see his daughter marry the great Isaac and become a matriarch of the Jewish people, which was driven by love of God and love and respect for Abraham, Eliezer goes through the mission. He doesn't let this tempting loophole cloud his real sense of purpose. And this can be inspiring for us as addicts, because I think this should sound sort of familiar to us, looking for the loophole that will allow us to get what we want and not do what we're supposed to do. That should sound like maybe some of our experiences in life before we got sober. You know, and most of us become so good at finding these loopholes that our lives fall apart because we go through all those loopholes. So in recovery, I think we should take our cue from Eliezer to bypass the loophole and stay focused on God's will for us and not on what we want for ourselves. So Eliezer packs up 10 camels full of presents and jewels and gems and clothing and gifts for Rebecca, he knows he's going to see. It's not a mystery who he's going to see. He's going to see Rebecca, who's the daughter of Laban, who lives in a different part of the world, a different part of the Middle East. He packs up these camels and he travels across the desert. It's a long trip. Eliezer's not a young man at this point either. So it says, but now we get to this point, Genesis 24:19. Eliezer goes to the village or place where he thinks Rebecca is, and sure enough, she shows up. And she's a young girl at this point. It's not clear how old she is. Some people say she's 3 years old. Some people say she's a little older. But she's not an adult. She's a child at this point. She shows up, and she offers to give Eliezer a drink. And then it says, in 24:19, says, when she, Rebecca, finished giving him, meaning Eliezer, the drink, she said, I will draw water even for your camels until they have finished drinking. So this is a remarkable act of kindness. This is what shows Eliezer that she is worthy to marry Isaac. Eliezer is watching carefully because he also, despite the whole conflict of interest we described previously, is watching to see if Rebecca is worthy of marrying Isaac. And of course, again, he could say, oh, she's not worthy. Settled. I'm going back to Abraham so that my daughter can marry Isaac. But no, he follows through and he watches as this young girl single-handedly gives water to 10 camels, which, I don't know if you can imagine this. I'm not exactly sure how much water a camel drinks, but I think it's probably many dozens of gallons of water. So there's 10 of them. So here's this little girl who's pulling hundreds and hundreds of gallons of water out of a well in buckets and giving them to these camels without being asked. She offers, and without being helped. And what's interesting about it is just compared to how I think most of us, and certainly I, would react to the situation, which is that if I were watering camels for somebody and that person, as its commentary says, was just sitting there watching, Eliezer was just sitting there letting this little girl water his camels, I would probably say, hey, buddy, would you mind lending a hand? I'm trying to help you out here. But she doesn't say anything like that. Most of us probably would say, get your own water, right? Wouldn't even be doing it. But It's an inspiring story for recovery, meaning that we should be willing to make the effort, even when it doesn't appear to be a reasonable use of our time. I think there's a lot of things like this in recovery where something comes up that you have to do or you're told to do and it doesn't seem worthwhile, and you certainly don't understand why you have to do it, but you do it anyway. And I think that this is the lesson of this moment. If we question it too much, we may miss the opportunity to help someone and help ourselves too. Now, after this watering, Eliezer gives Rebekah, he decides, okay, this is the girl for Isaac. So he immediately gives her some very nice presents, gives her gold jewelry and other presents. And Rebekah says, I'm from your family, and I'm here, on the behalf of Abraham and Isaac, and to arrange your marriage and so forth. So Rebekah is excited. She runs home to tell her brother. I'm sorry if I stated earlier that Laban is her father. Laban is her brother, older brother. Laban is one of the Bible's most dishonest and difficult characters. So it says in Genesis 24:29, Laban ran to the man, meaning Laban runs out of the tent to see Eliezer because he's so excited that someone has shown up with all this treasure. And what makes Laban so impossible but also so familiar in program terms is his tendency to dress up deceit into phony goodness. He says, he tries to be very pious. He says, "Come, O blessed of God," to Eliezer when inviting him into the house. But as the sages note, he's really just excited because of the gold that he's seen given to his sister. That's why he runs out to greet Eliezer. Laban is thinking, well, if Rebekah's just a child and she got, gold jewelry from Abraham's servants, then imagine what I'm going to get. I'm the man of the house, or at least he thinks he's a man of the house. Subsequently, Laban decides that Rebekah should marry Isaac. Now, this is unusual because what's happening is that Laban's father is sitting there. Rebekah's actual father is sitting right there, but Laban speaks up, talks ahead of his father. He's very improper, and he decides Rebekah should marry Isaac. That's what it says. He says the matter stemmed from God in Genesis 24:50. Again, Laban's attempt to sound holy should not obscure what he's really doing. He's greedy. His greed causes him to act disrespectfully to his father. As recovering addicts, we've probably had our moments as Laban, self-seeking while attempting to appear altruistic or pious. So in recovery, we can work on getting our behavior and self-awareness up so that we won't act this way. Genesis 25:8 says, "And Abraham expired at a good age, mature and content, and he was gathered to his people. His sons, Isaac and Ishmael, buried him in the cave of Machpelah." Now, I haven't talked about Ishmael, but Ishmael was the son of Abraham and Hagar, who was Sarah's servant. We talked about that previously. Sarah gives Hagar to Abraham as a sort of second wife in order to have a child, and that child is Ishmael. Ishmael is traditionally taught to be known as the progenitor of the Muslims and the Arabs. So Ishmael is the other branch of the family, the world monotheistic family. But Ishmael in the Bible is treated as someone who's a little suspicious and not to be trusted and not to be around. In fact, earlier in the book of Genesis, Sarah orders Abraham to send Hagar and Ishmael away because she doesn't think that Ishmael is a good influence on Isaac and she doesn't want him around. But and he does leave. But Ishmael is another one of these sort of puzzling characters in that he represents or embodies a lot that's good and bad at the same time. So when you're reading this, it's sort of surprising to see Ishmael is involved in the burial of Abraham, given that he's considered to be like a bad person and that he was thrown out of the house. But what the sages say is that Ishmael did repentance later in life. So he turned his life around and he merited to be included in the funeral. And this can teach us a lesson in recovery, which is really no matter what we've done in our addiction, it is possible to make amends and regain some of our standing with friends and loved ones. Things may never be the same as they were, or as they would have been if we'd not acted out or been selfish. But true amends and repentance, especially living amends, where we devote ourselves to being better people towards those we hurt in the past, can make a huge difference in our lives and program of recovery.
You've been listening to the For I Will Be With You podcast. Daily reflections on recovery from the Bible. www.foriwillbewithyou.com